Thank you, guys. I feel like I should address that statement. So just to give you a brief introduction, I currently work in the tech sector. I work on what's called the growth team in a venture capital fund. And to put it very simply, there are two sides to an investment venture capital fund in the tech industry. One side deals purely with the investments. So these people decide who to invest in, how much, at what terms. My team then goes in and accelerates those businesses to ensure that the fund gets a high rate of return at the shortest amount of time possible. I run that team of 5, and there's room for 3 more. If anybody decides they don't want to go to uni and you want to come and join the tech industry instead, always interested. But just to backtrack a little bit, to tell you a little bit more about how I got here, I want to go back to when I was about, I would say 4 or 5, and I was going to kindergarten, and I used to always get asked this question, which I'm sure everyone can relate to, which is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I never really understood that question because the what really confused me. And I used to ask what are the options? And the examples I would get would be doctor, teacher, lawyer, accountant, engineer, and stuff like that. I'd be like, but I don't know if I want to be any of those things. So I usually used to give really stupid answers just for the sake of writing something down. So I remember one time I said I wanted to be a pizza chef purely because I got invited to somebody's birthday and we made pizzas and it was fun. I was like, maybe I'll do that for the rest of my life. Then obviously, that didn't fly. I was forced to write something else, then I was like, I don't know, lawyer. And that kind of perpetuated until one day when I was about 10, I was asked to audition for a ballet school in London. It was a pretty big deal at the time because I think not many Malaysians go to full-time art school. My parents were very sort of divided on whether I should go, but I was given a scholarship and they were like, well, it seems like the fates have decided it, so I went. And everybody in that school knew from day one that they wanted to be a ballet dancer, and I still had no idea what I wanted to be. So these guys, at the beginning of the school year, when you ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up, they only had one answer, to be a principal dancer. And I just never knew. So for the rest of my life in school, I always thought there was something wrong with me. Like, how come I didn't know? How come everybody else knew exactly what they wanted to be and were laser-focused, determined for one singular goal? And I was just kind of like going along because I happened to be there and I happened to, was lucky enough to end up at this place with these opportunities, with these amazing people. So I just carried on. Until one day, I was called into the principal's office and was offered a contract. I was 16 at the time. Still didn't know if I wanted to be a dancer for real. Just kind of carried on, as you see a pattern emerging here. And so because of that, I decided not to take it, which to a lot of people's surprise, is ridiculous. Like, you simply don't do that. But my parents were very pleased because they never really wanted me to be a dancer anyway. And they asked me, what are you going to do then? And I was like, I don't know, I guess I'll go to university like everybody else. To my disappointment, though, my parents offered me 4 options for university that they were willing to pay for. And the willing to pay for is very important because I wasn't able to get a scholarship based on my parents' level of income. There was no way, unless they disowned me, I would not get a scholarship otherwise. So these were the 4 options that were presented to me: medicine, accounting, engineering, or law. I was very bad at math, so accounting and engineering were no-goes. And I associated medicine with the nerds in class, and I decided that I wasn't one of them, so I promptly dismissed that option and realized that then that left me with law. So I ended up going to uni and did law. Now, I will say that I didn't hate it. I actually enjoyed studying law very, very much, and you might hear from Mohsin later how the study of law can be very different from practicing in law. I still appreciate what I learned in law and realize that it taught me a lot about problem solving and figuring out what is the best course of action in every situation based on a set defined of rules. But then, over the course of my degree, I got what was called seasonal affective depression. And those of you who have never lived in sunlight-deprived countries, when you go to the UK, just be aware that this could happen to you too. It's not a big deal. It just means that over the winter times, you might be a little bit sad, which is where the name of the disorder, disease, whatever you want to call it, comes from. And as part of that, I was recommended by the university counselor, and I'm still very grateful for this, to take up some form of exercise. And I'd spent, the last 18 years of my life dancing. I didn't know any other exercise, so I ended up dancing. And when I graduated, I decided that I actually wanted to dance. It's a bit of a flippant decision. I just, thought, well, if it makes me happy, then maybe I should be doing it. So I went and started my training contract. And on the third week of my training contract, I was offered a contract with a ballet company. So I went up to my boss in his office at 6 p.m. and then said, "Hey, David, I'm leaving." And then he goes, "6 p.m. is a bit early. Just make sure you come in earlier tomorrow." And I said, "No, I'm leaving." I think we never really quite got over that, so yeah. But hey, I danced for the next 2 years. I still, at that point, was not completely happy. I wasn't entirely fulfilled, but I decided to pursue something that made me feel like there was a chance at doing what I was supposed to do. Obviously that, as you know, didn't work out because that's not what I do now. And then I did a bunch of other things after that. I left and walked into the first opportunity that presented itself. A year and a half after that, I walked into the next first opportunity that presented itself, and those were a charity followed by a sports social enterprise. And then finally, I decided that I was smart, initiated, determined, and I wanted something fast-paced. And at the time, the trendy thing to do was to go and work in tech. So I decided I wanted to work in tech. I applied to 100 different companies in tech. I had this number in mind because if I applied to 100 things, surely someone will give me an interview. That's not true. Nobody gave me an interview, which was quite sad. But I applied again. In the next round, I got an offer from Uber. And they then said to me, "You have two options. You can either move back to Malaysia and be a manager, or you can stay in London and be a coordinator. What do you want to do?" I was very young at the time, so I was like, manager. I want to be a manager, of course. So I moved back. So that's how I ended up in tech. From there, it was just one thing after another, and that's where I am now. And I will say that I have no regrets. I am part of the 15%. I love what I do. I think what I do is very interesting, truly very fast-paced, a bit sometimes too fast-paced. And the people that I meet are very, very interesting people with lots of interesting ideas that I get to exchange with on a regular basis. But the purpose of telling you this sort of very long, meandering story is to illustrate how really from the beginning I had no idea I would end up where I am today. And the reality is, even up till last year, I would have no idea that this venture capital fund in London would be where I would be today. And I don't know what's going to happen next year or the year after that or 5 years from now. And when someone says to me, "What's your 5-year plan?" I say, "I have none." Because the reality is, even if you had one, it probably will not come true. And I say this to you because I want you to know that you don't have to worry so much about what happens next year, the year after that, or even 10 years from now. Try your best at whatever you do, whenever you do it, and then let life happen. Because at the end of the day, the better you are at sort of adjusting to where you've ended up, the better you will succeed in life. I also want to tell you a little bit about how my parents ultimately kind of disowned me for 2 years because I decided to dance after graduating from a law degree. So they didn't speak to me for 2 years. And at the time, I was very resentful of this, but I realize now that really my parents wanted me to be happy. And the way they expressed it may not have been the right thing to have done at the time, and they acknowledge it now. But I think parents ultimately have an idea of what leads to happiness. And when they say to you that they want a stable career for you or that they want you to earn lots of money, it's because they believe these things will lead to happiness. I will blanketly say that's untrue. So if you're a parent sitting in the audience today, just know that there are many paths to happiness and everybody has their own journey. And be open to the possibilities that maybe your kid has a very different journey than you do. But I will say this, a couple of days ago, my mother came up to me after a bunch of her friends came over for coffee and tau sa pia, and then they left, and then she came up to me and then she was like, "Oh my God, Emily, I'm so glad that you love what you do. And I was like, wait, what's going on here? And then she went, oh, you know, Mr. So-and-so's son tried to commit suicide. And obviously I was like, wait, why? And then she was like, because he hates what he does. He just cannot bear to live his life. And he said, she said, I have never been more thankful for anything in my life than for the fact that you love what you do. So just bear that in mind. Loving what you do is very important. Honoring your parents is very important, but honoring your children is also a very important thing. So I'll leave you with that. It's a very short sort of speech, whatever you want to call it. Just in summary, go with the flow, pursue what comes up, and pursue your own journey to whatever's ahead of you. Thanks.